Why do you think it's so hard for people to actually apply what they've learned once the program ends?
So I think there's two aspects of it. I think you mentioned right off the bat that people get very excited for a program. Everything in theory sounds great. They get engaging. But I think a lot of companies today forget that training is really the way I view it is you're setting the expectation and you're being more prescriptive on the theory. Coaching is where I always felt the real magic happens because you're moving from telling them what to do to now asking questions in those coaching sessions. You become very Socratic. So it's getting them to think critically, think for themselves and implement it.
Hello and welcome to Smart Profit AI. Today we're diving into a challenge that every trainer and coach faces, how to turn learning into real behavior change. We've seen it all happen. People start a program excited, take great notes, and then go right back to the old habits. So how do we move from learning to actually doing? My guest today is Michael Sanchez, a learning and development consultant who's worked with organizations across industries to help them build programs and people to adopt and remember. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. Let's start off with you. For those who haven't met you, or could you share a bit about your background and what drew you into the world of professional training and coaching?
Yeah, of course. Michael Sanchez, as Anika just described, I've been in sales going back now 18 years. I got the majority of my experience, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to describe it, through door to door knocking. And throughout the last 15 plus years, I've always seen a gap specifically around sales enablement and how people are going to market. And I've experienced it myself firsthand. And how I got into learning and development is by being an individual contributor, but that rush only keeps going for so long. And then I really found my passion when it came to filling in a gap for some of these individuals who were just given a list to call or were told they need to close some deals and they didn't really even know where to start or how to process. And seeing those light bulb moments with some of these individuals is what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. So you've worked with so many clients across industries. What keeps you passionate about helping teams learn and implement new skills?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects of it. If I look at it first from a qualitative perspective, it's every individual is different and
Yeah.
every group is different that you get to work with. So I think the challenge of how can I get that first 10 to 20% to adopt and then you see the rest of the group follow suit. And I think from a quantitative perspective, one of the biggest passions is seeing successes and development from a career for some of these individuals.
Yeah.
I've worked with people that are entry level, just getting a role out of college. Someone as old as 78 who's already a multimillionaire. So there's a very different dynamic of people you get to work with. And that's always fun and passionate. It gets me excited.
That's great. And on our previous conversation, you mentioned that one of the biggest challenge in training isn't just teaching, it's the implementation. Why do you think it's so hard for people to actually apply what they've learned once the program ends?
So I think there's two aspects of it. I think you mentioned right off the bat that people get very excited for a program. Everything in theory sounds great. They get engaging. But I think a lot of companies today forget that training is really the way I view it is you're setting the expectation and you're being more prescriptive on the theory. Coaching is where I always felt the real magic happens because you're moving from telling them what to do to now asking questions in those coaching sessions. You become very Socratic. So it's getting them to think critically, think for themselves and implement it. The gap that I see is unless you're doing this weekly, I think the forgetting curve, if anybody's seen a study that says you're forgetting 80 to 90% of what
Yeah.
you learned if you
Oh,
don't
okay.
implement it within the first 7 to 8 days.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
That timeline is very key. And it just gradually declines
Yeah.
over and over until you hit day 7 and day 8.
course. So do you think it's more about the mindset of how people go into the program, or is it the actual program and how it's built and delivered?
So it's definitely going to be a mix of both. I think to the first bit, the mindset aspect of it, I think one of the first things and it's very simple, this is not groundbreaking information, is we just ask people if they even want to go through a training program.
Of course, yeah.
If the answer is no, we're not going to push the ball up a hill. That individual is just not a right fit. And so they need to come in with the right mindset. They need to come in wanting to engage, wanting to learn. And I see two different type of demographics where I think a big piece of what motivates a lot of the younger generation today is how am I growing personally and in my career outside what are just the monetary gains. And there is definitely a structural thing. I think where I look at the most successful programs that I've been a part of, you need to talk about it's an hour a week on just reflection, right? This is what we're learning in the program, but there needs to be 5 hours at least
Yeah.
for each individual where they're dedicating to the practice. If
Yeah.
not, then you're not really working it.
Of course, yeah. So you also brought up that personality types can really influence adoption. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What kinds of learners tend to follow through versus fade out?
Yeah, it's actually funny because this may seem even counterintuitive to
Yeah,
what people assume. Usually, the people who give the biggest pushback, who ask the most questions, who are challenging you as a trainer or as a speaker, are the personality types that actually have the quickest speed to adoption. Now, you have some of your more passive individuals, and it's really the way I work around it is before any training program kicks off, I actually have a one-on-one with each individual to understand what are their personal motivations and what are the goals they trying to get to. And then I'll bring this up along the program, hold them accountable, which is, hey, you mentioned that you were looking to get that vacation with your mom to Barbados for the first time because she hasn't been back to see her family. Do you really feel like you're doing enough to get there? And I think once you call people out on their bad habits, they acknowledge it more, and that's when the process really begins.
yeah. So you've worked with hundreds of clients and you've probably seen that mid-program fatigue kicks in.
Yes.
Where do you think the enthusiasm drops? No, sorry, what causes the fatigue and how do you keep people motivated and engaged all the way through the finish line?
Yeah, so I look at normally we structure our programs to be around 6 months. And the reason we do it around 6 months is because we usually see fatigue begin to kick in really heavy around the 5 to 6 month period. And you'll see the attendance rates really begin to drop and other
Yeah,
excuses come out. Now, how do you keep them motivated, engaged? I primarily tend to work with individuals that are in the sales field, and these are highly competitive individuals.
yeah,
So to keep them engaged, I usually share wins and examples of their peers because they'll see that light at the end of the tunnel. And
yeah,
then they'll begin to question themselves like, hey, look, why haven't I gotten these results? Is it because of a lack of effort work? And I think the second bit when it comes to the engagement aspect of it, it really comes down to also, I think there has to be a point where you ask the participants for the feedback and what other topics that would like to come up. So I know, for example, in these kind of times, everybody wants to learn about AI.
yeah, yeah,
So we've incorporated that to stay fresh,
yeah,
but there's an inflection point that every single attendee or participant goes through where they feel they no longer have
yeah,
what I call as a knowledge gap,
of course.
where they now say to themselves, I feel like you've taught me everything I can learn. Now it's on me to implement it because I feel it's currently a skill gap and I just need more repetitions.
Of
Don't
course.
necessarily need more enforcement.
Yeah. And is there any certain strategies you found that really help the training stick beyond the first few sessions?
So I think the first few sessions, you have to find a way to apply it to their real life.
Yeah. Okay.
So one of the principles I coach on is a communication framework and structure. And this communication framework is based on 5 pillars, as I call them. And I could teach those all day and people nod and they say they make sense.
Yeah.
But unless I'm taking those and asking them to create a list of what are the top 20 accounts you're going to go after, let's create a template using the 5 pillars that you're then going to use in your messaging to you outreach. The one-on-ones is really where I think, outside of just making it real life and applying it to their day to day, it's the one-on-ones and having that weekly session. Because I've had participants tell me,
Yeah.
Mike, I was delaying this, but then I saw you and I had a meeting on the calendar. So I knew I needed to get this done so
Of
I could have
course.
something to show you
Of course.
where
It
it
goes
has to be applicable.
Yeah, it goes back to accountability. So being accountable for something. So
Yes.
you have to do something when you know you have someone that's holding you accountable for it. So that is,
What have you seen from your perspective that has worked best when it comes to that implementation piece?
I feel like definitely with the accountability. So having someone there, that being a one-to-one coach or being a one-to-one mentor, definitely helps you drive further, and it stops that. What I've seen, it stops that fatigue go. So it stops that fatigue because you know if you have a mentor or a coach who's supporting you throughout your whole time throughout the program, and you know you have weekly meetings that you have to show your mentor or your coach. You can't just turn up to the meeting with nothing. Your coach or your mentor is gonna get onto you then and be like, okay, so what have you done this week? Oh, you can't just say, oh, I've not really done anything. What's going to happen then is it's kind of you don't want to get that embarrassment from them. I would
That's what a
say,
lot of it comes out that, yeah.
yeah, I would say 100% having that one to one is definitely needed in programs. Definitely.
And I think also when you do group sessions,
Yeah.
that social peer pressure, like you're talking about, where I think a big shift that we've done and we've seen from other trainings that I've gone through. 'Cause sometimes you'll jump onto a training and it's
Yeah.
someone just pulling up a deck and they're
Yeah.
just talking at you for 45 minutes in a deck. And one thing we really try to do is we give a task and an assignment
Yeah.
with each specific module that
Yeah.
we're covering. So even if it's a training and I'm covering a deck,
Yeah.
that deck is only going to be covered for 15, 20 minutes. And the rest of the time is going to be spent reviewing how you completed that task based on what were the principles we covered that day. And it's always funny when you hear people say, "Oh, Mike, I didn't do a good job. I didn't
Yeah.
do the homework today," and
Yeah.
you almost feel that peer embarrassment
Of
in front,
course. Yeah.
especially if it's a group.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So do you think there's a balance between structure and autonomy that helps learners take more ownership?
Yes, I think there's you have to have a structure and a timeline in place,
Hmm.
but you have to be willing, and this goes back to the first point I made,
Yeah.
to adopt it to each individual. Because especially in the world that I'm playing when it comes to sales, it's not a perfect science and everybody has their own flavor. Where, for example, I've had people tell me, we do cold call trainings, and I've had people, Mike, I'm never going to make a cold call. Like, I don't care how often you teach me about this. It's not something I'm doing. So how can I adjust in that moment to then cover a topic that's going to be more relevant to them or double down in a certain area, while also not babying too much?
Okay, that's good. Okay, then. So let's talk about that bridge between theory and action because so many learners get it intellectually, but they never apply it. What are some ways you help clients move from understanding a concept to actually changing their day-to-day behavior?
Yeah. So I guess here, this is a salesperson that I work with. Her name was Christine, and Christine was part of a team of 20 individuals at that time, I believe, I recall correctly. And Christine was right in the middle. So right in that 10 to 11 range as far as her performance went. And the concept that we wanted to work on that was company wide in the theme was the concept of multi-threading. How can you multi-thread? How can you reach out to various people within an organization? Should I send an email first? Should I use the conversation? And what we did was the adoption piece came when during we had our first training session. It was one training and it was followed by 3 one-on-one coaching sessions. And once I set the expectation of, hey, there's 2 to 3 people at least you want to have in your cycle, because statistics share that when you're getting three stakeholders involved, your close rates are just going to increase dramatically. And Christine took that information. We gave her to set the foundation, but it was what she did in between those calls as far as the action items and the next steps that we set. So in Christine's case, we would talk about a deal that we were going over, find out who were the people she needed to engage with. And after every call, she was given clear action items. Okay, you need to call this individual, reference this point of the conversation that you talked about, and then we're going to review that the next week.
Okay.
For her, once she began to apply these tactics and outside of calls, she went from that 10 to 11 middle of the pack and actually ended up becoming the number one overall performer and got promoted. And she's working for a Fortune 200 company these days. So
Wow.
good
That's
for her.
amazing. Yeah, that is good for her. It's amazing. Yeah, so how do you measure whether that change is really happening? Do you look at metrics or feedback or just the real world performance like the sort of
Yeah. So
shared?
it's a mixture of both. When it's behavioral changes, I'm not looking so much at the lagging indicators, which
Yeah,
are you have your revenue numbers going up, more deals closed, because there's a couple things that are out of Christine's control.
yeah,
But what we did was begin to work off of what I call, and I'm a big fan of them, are checklists. And this is where it goes into that autonomy piece where you mentioned earlier. So it was just a checklist of 10 points of, hey, have you got another stakeholder involved? It's a yes or no. If it was a no, then she and her point knew I need to do something better. I need to tweak and change this right now. And this became a process where it was self assessment now. I didn't need to be there because the checklist would then be that guide. And I'm looking for your specific point where the behavior, if I see 2 weeks with back to back no's, I'm raising my first flag. Now, if it's a third week, I'm then going back to that same principle and week recovering, and I'm trying to determine, is there a knowledge gap or
yeah, of
is there just hesitation with the individual? Sometimes
course.
they know what they need to do, like cold calling,
Yeah,
but then there's a mental block where they just don't want to pick up the
yeah,
phone because they're
of
scared of
course.
fear of rejection.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that if that's the case then.
Of course, yeah. No, definitely. There is always that mental blockers, the fear of rejection. It stops you from driving forward. So, and again, it's about the mindset as well of how you perceive things and how you look at things as well. Like if you're too scared to do a cold call or go and
Send
speak,
that email.
yeah, send an email, then what was the point of coming onto this program? The point is for you to get better at these things, not to, okay, let your fear just get in the way. So it's really amazing how, yeah, this conversation is really good. Um,
And what happens is also too as well, what personally I believe is, and I could just be completely wrong,
yeah,
but ultimately I think with Christine's case, one thing that I know implemented or had a big change when she began to implement it is when I actually would pull up my own live examples of
yeah,
when I was doing these tactics. Because I think a lot of challenges when it comes to the adoption piece is there even a belief in this process or this system? And that's the first gap and hurdle you as a or you as a leader of training development need to tackle. And one of the biggest gaps that we have in our market today from training and development that I've heard is, and I've gotten this feedback from clients is, yeah, Mike, I think it's difficult when you have a trainer that comes in that's part of an older generation and they haven't sold or done this themselves in over 15 or 20 years. So the people in the group won't buy into it
yeah,
because they don't even think this individual's doing it. You need to, it's a phrase that I live by, which is don't ask somebody to do something you yourself wouldn't do.
do. Okay. Yeah. It's amazing. Okay. Yeah. So let's kind of shift focus now. So technology has completely changed how people learn, but it's also made attention spans shorter. From your point of view, how do digital learning and virtual formats impacted the engagement and adoption?
So I think digital formats have been great for creating a program at scale
Hmm.
and allowing the individual to adjust at their own rate, learn at their own rate, go back and read. Where the gap is that unless these programs aren't coming with exercises implemented and reflection points, they're going to be failures. Now, I think back to my career, and I give kudos to shout out here to HubSpot, which is one of the things that I really liked about their training and enablement
Yeah.
was they have a completely free course online for you to update but their exams for you to get the certification after were incredibly complex and they were difficult questions to answer because they were almost all the same, just with a little tweak in the answer. And those exams and those reflection points are what made more of an impact than the course because I wouldn't get an answer and I would then go back. And I think it's that going back
Yeah.
is where people are learning, where they're forcing to connect those neurons and those dots all together.
Yeah. And do you think then digital platforms help with people acting quickly before they lose their momentum?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. I think I hate to answer it with just thinking I want to leave it up to the individual,
Yeah.
but my gut tells me it definitely has to have an impact because if I'm not there and I'm limited based on the hours there are in a week, if that person has that answer right then and there and that guidance, that's sometimes that affirmation or that reaffirmation is all they're looking for to have the confidence and go shoot their shot. So I do believe it could help with the speed to adoption.
Great. And because we're Smart Profit I have to ask, what role do you think AI could play in helping learners stay engaged or personalize their learning experience?
I think where I've seen the biggest impact, and I even play with these tools myself, and it's actually funny the experience they created where so companies like Hyperbound are coming out where it's almost like sales AI coaches.
Yeah.
And what I thought was unique about that experience, it almost gives you feedback, you letting know you could do live feedback, live coaching, you get to adjust and you don't have to actually practice with real life prospects. But it created a competitive environment because it would show a board about how everybody was doing on the team. So everybody would just try to outdo each other. And that's where I see it can help and increase the engagement. But
Was.
that person doesn't have that nature to
Yeah.
begin with, then it's going to be an uphill battle anyway.
It's useless. Okay, so Michael, before we wrap up, what is one challenge you're focused on right now?
I think the biggest challenge is there's the adoption piece, which personally I think being in the field is something that I've always dealt with. But now I'm definitely more focused on the speed to adoption because if I'm able to get an individual to adopt within a week and
Yeah,
get action taken, if they see a positive result, that automatically is giving them the hit they need from a dopamine perspective. It's reinforcing positive conditioning that allows them to go. But that timing of when I do my first session and making sure that they're applying it 3 to 4 days later is where it's still a huge challenge because people's lives come up. And
of course. Yeah,
I was talking to someone earlier today. They're like, hey, I haven't been able to do this because I'm actually going to a funeral. And so the speed to adoption piece does not become as important. It's about
yeah,
adjusting to
yeah.
that individual in that moment. And that's always going to be something that we'll be dealing with, but the speed to adoption.
Okay. And where do you see your business going in the next 6 to 12 months?
I think we're in a very fortunate and lucky space because the term sales enablement, training and enablement, learning and development has really blown up more personally that I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. And I think it's even more crucial to companies because not just tech companies that are going through this, but you're seeing this across all industries where they are running leaner with less employees. They're trying to get more out of the people that are currently there.
Yeah,
And how do you do that? Usually, one of the biggest levers you're going to pull is learning and enablement and development so that you can continue to feed their growth. So, that's where I see that I think we're in a good position because as companies become leaner, we have the benefit. But if they want to open up the floodgates and begin to
yeah.
hire again, the onboarding then becomes a play again. But I think, yeah, it's that working with who we have and trying to get the most out of them.
Okay, great. So, Michael, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. It's been a fantastic conversation and very inspiring to our listeners. For anyone who wants to know more about you and your company, where should they go?
So I would definitely recommend go and check out our website, growgenie.com. Also connect with myself on LinkedIn, Michael Sanchez, my CEO as well. He's got great content that you can follow. Michael Hansen is his name. And we're always trying to give out advice that you can actually apply in your day to day. Because if you're not applying in your day to day, then as you said, Anika, it's all
Yeah,
for nothing, fruitless.
great. Okay, thank you so much again, once again. And for our listeners, if you like this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.